I didn't understand. My sister Sue was viciously murdered. Why? Why?
I don't think I've ever seen anything so hurtful.
There was nothing that we could do.
There just weren't any good leads.
I found it extremely frustrating. I felt that I should have done more.
The questions were always there in my mind.
There was a murder that bore many similarities to Sue's murder.
Just a little bit of information, and that's all we needed. Hope meant finding who did it to her. That person was still out there, maybe harming other people.
I was a Snohomish County Deputy Sheriff assigned to the Detective Division. I was contacted by the dispatcher. They were requesting that I respond to an address in the Alderwood area regarding a homicide and that they needed somebody to process the crime scene for fingerprints.
Susan Schwarz's boyfriend arrives home after a day at work to find the 24-year-old woman dead on the floor.
The house was off the main road. It wasn't very large. The home looked very tidy, very well kept. But there was a body in the bathroom, a female subject. Her hands were tied behind her back with what appeared to be some type of electrical cord. She was nude, and she appeared to have a gunshot wound to her head.
There was a pillow next to her head that had blood on it and a bullet hole shot through it. And there was blood on the floor and all over her face. She had a black bra wrapped around her face like a gag. There were .22 caliber shell casings that were laying on the floor there. It appeared that she'd been shot in the head execution style after she'd been tied up. So it was a horrific crime.
Maybe she had interrupted a burglar. It didn't make any sense because most burglars run when they're confronted by somebody.
As police process the house, the carpet seems to offer up some possible clues.
This was plush carpeting, and you could see that there were distinctive prints of two different sizes, a smaller one and a larger one. She was barefooted, so there was no barefoot prints that were on the carpet. We had two different suspects that we were looking at. So it could have been possible that it was two of them that were together when the murder happened.
I processed everything that I could possibly think of in hopes of finding some latent fingerprints. I processed the cabinet that the stereo was on. It appeared that whatever was touched was taken. There were some things on the kitchen table, but they didn't appear to have been disturbed. A lot of times burglars will go up and they'll put their hands on a window, shading the window so that they can see inside the house. But I was able to find nothing.
Friends say Susan Schwarz was a free spirit and a role model to her little sister.
I thought she was just the coolest kid on the block. She was so stylish and pretty. My sister was barely 5 feet tall, so she would wear these gigantic platform shoes, and she would hem her pants all the way down to the ground so you couldn't even see her feet underneath all of her clothing. She had the most beautiful reddish auburn hair, and if she would have just let it curl naturally, it would have just been gorgeous. But no, the straight hair was the thing in those days. Everybody had it down to their waist, and it had to be straight, perfectly straight to be cool. So she would go through this incredible braiding process and rubber band wrapping process on down her hair at nighttime to try to make it straight. She would take her bangs and pull them down and tape them to her head at night before she went to sleep. So you would hear her in the bathrooms in the morning ripping that tape off. Rip, ow! Rip, ow! And she'd have these red marks on her forehead after she would come out of the bathroom, and they'd slowly fade throughout breakfast and go away. But every morning she'd have those bangs taped to her forehead. She was quiet and kind. She took time to listen to me. Even though I was a lot younger than her, she never made fun of my ideas or my thoughts. That was a really big thing. She made friends, but not a lot of people in her actual inner circle, I don't think. Very private person. And she had her friend, Karen.
I was a freshman, and Sue was a sophomore at the high school. We didn't know each other. We were in a class, and I turned around in my chair and started talking. And she just kind of sat there and looked at me because she was kind of like shocked. We didn't know each other. I don't know why I did it, but pretty soon we just began hanging out. And we just started to be best friends. She was very logical, where I was just out there. And she was very intelligent. She used to walk around with a book in her hand or a thesaurus. She loved to develop her vocabulary. We just enjoyed doing things, like sometimes dressing up and modeling and taking pictures of each other. And we had fun. We used to have a saying, "Let no man come between us." Nothing came between us. She was always willing to give what you needed to make things better.
When this terrible thing happened to my sister, I was 13 years old. We were starting to develop more friendship, despite just being sisters, because I wasn't just that bratty little kid. We actually could talk about stuff that we did have in common. So it was nice. It was nice. I was at school, and they came to my class and took me to the office. They didn't tell me anything. Then my mom came, and we went and got my brother, and we went home. She took us in and sat us down in the living room, and she was trying to explain to us that Sue was gone, and we didn't understand what gone meant, that she said that she had been killed, and I was just in shock. I think I just sat there crying. Our family was just devastated. Numb. They were really numb with shock.
As police scour Susan's home, something feels off, way off.
There was no ransacking. It just didn't feel right. Burglars don't go in there and shoot somebody to steal $150 worth of stereo equipment.
It's pretty unusual to have a homicide occur during the commission of a burglary, so it was a real puzzling case.
After being at the crime scene, there was no doubt in my mind that it wasn't a burglary. I don't think I've ever seen anything so depressing and so hurtful as to see a naked woman bound up with a gag stuffed in her mouth and shot in the head. I can't fathom it. It was an execution. She was killed by somebody that she knew.
The feelings that I had, it was just overwhelming terror and shock, anger, and the ever-present why. Why? Why would someone do that to her? For a 13-year-old kid, that just kind of shut me down for a while. Our family was just destroyed.
Whoever the killer was comfortable enough to walk up to the house, tie her up, put a gag in her mouth, and shoot her.
Detectives begin to question witnesses. They start with the man who found Susan's body, her boyfriend, Bill Hassler.
Sue was everything to Bill. I mean, he just worshiped her entirely.
He was very much a loner. He didn't have a lot of male friends or anything.
You had to look at the boyfriend first, Sue's boyfriend, Bill Hassler. He was very emotional, very upset when they talked to him about what happened when he came home and found her.
That poor guy, he was just like a zombie. I've never seen anyone so devastated.
Despite Bill's shock and sadness, investigators can't rule him out just yet. They interview neighbors about what they saw and heard earlier that day.
There was a person that heard what sounded like a squealing noise around 9:45 in the morning coming from the area of Sue's house. They didn't think much of it at the time. You know, if that squealing noise was when Sue was shot, it does give a time frame when the murder happened. Sue's boyfriend, Bill Hassler, had an alibi for the day. We did know at that time that he was at work, so his alibi panned out. So he was ruled out.
While police search for leads, the medical examiner conducts Susan's autopsy.
The cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds to her head. There's also lacerations to her head. The lacerations meant that it appears that she was attacked first, hit in the head, maybe would have dazed her. That would have led the person to be able to take control and then tie her up. Even though she was naked, there was no signs of a sexual assault.
Susan's murder leaves her family shocked and terrified.
Having Sue so viciously murdered in her own home robbed me of every bit of security that I think I had ever had as a kid, because home should always be safe. I was terrified that something was going to happen. I couldn't wrap my head around someone coming into her house and doing that to her. Home wasn't safe anymore.
Police shift their focus and question Karen Smith, Susan's best friend, who recently separated from her abusive husband, Gregory Johnson.
The police asked me if I knew anybody that might have something against Sue. My husband, Greg, didn't like Sue because he thought that she was trying to break us up. She didn't particularly like Greg. She just thought that he was basically an abusive type person. She didn't trust him. And she would let me know about that. Eventually, he started feeling it. He spent most of his time trying to keep me away from her because he knew that she knew what he was doing, and what he was doing was wrong. Him being physically violent with me.
The detective did go and talk to Gregory Johnson. He was cooperative. They asked him where he was on the day of the murder, and he said he was fishing. Detectives tracked down the people he was fishing with. And, you know, memories are not that great, so the people weren't able to really verify he was there or not there. I think he remained a person of interest, but then there's really nothing else to indicate that Greg was involved.
As police struggle to find answers, Susan's 13-year-old sister takes on a grim task.
I actually was asked by Bill personally to come and take out my sister's possessions. He couldn't do it. It was not a crime scene any longer at that point, but I knew I was looking at the place where she died and at the footsteps of the people that walked through her blood as they went through her house. So, it was terrible. It was absolutely terrible. I will never, ever get rid of that memory, ever. I can't. That stays in my brain forever. Never, ever forget that memory.
For months, detectives search for Susan's killer, but without a motive or any suspects, the case stalls.
I find it extremely frustrating. There's a point at which you've run out all of your leads, you've checked with everybody, and you simply can't do anything else, and it becomes inactive.
I was calling the police on a regular basis there for a while, but it went cold pretty quickly. I'd say within the first 6 months, it probably started to get put away.
In 1986, there was a murder in Seattle that bore many similarities to Sue's murder. The victim was Molly McClure, and she was lying on her stomach. She had her hands tied behind her back with an electrical cord. There was a gag in her mouth. She had injuries to her head.
Police zero in on a suspect. Sherwood Knight lives in the building and has a criminal record.
Sherwood Knight had been arrested for the murder.
He killed her very much similar to the way Sue was killed.
Because of the similarities, the same person could have been responsible.
This man could have done it.
In 1986, there was a murder in Seattle. The victim was killed by Sherwood Knight.
Detectives tried to figure out if it could be related to Susan Schwar's murder because the MO was very similar.
In Molly's case, she was sexually assaulted and Susan was not. But the other similarity between the two was that Sherwood Knight knew both of the women.
Police are surprised to learn that Sherwood Knight has any connection to Susan Schwarz. Knight turns out to be the half-brother of Gregory Johnson, the estranged, abusive husband of Susan's best friend, Karen.
Sherwood was familiar with Susan because she kind of traveled in the same circles as his half-brother, as Gregory Johnson.
Sherwood Knight was always nice to me. We called him Cavey. When I found out that Cavey had murdered that woman, it didn't make any sense to me. Why would he do that? What did she do to him?
We found out the connection between Sherwood Knight and Greg Johnson being half-brothers, and that Greg Johnson was married to Karen, who was Susan's best friend. We wanted to interview him that day.
Snohomish detectives track down Gregory Johnson and find him in prison, doing time for robbery. It was not the first time he had been behind bars. And Johnson has a story to tell that he says took place on the day of Susan Schwarz's murder.
He says, I was with my brother, Sherwood. I was driving him around with a couple other guys looking for a place to burglarize, and we pulled into this driveway, and the three of them went in, and they came out of the house, and Sherwood had a gun in his hand, and he says, we better not get caught for this one. And later on that night, I was watching the news on TV, and they said that Susan Schwarz was murdered.
Johnson implicates Sherwood Knight. But the word of a convicted criminal alone isn't enough to charge him.
Sherwood Knight was in jail because of Molly McClure's murder. He had an attorney, so he could not be interviewed about Sue's case. Even though it seemed important, there wasn't a lot to go on with Sue's case. There was still a lack of evidence.
In 1986, Sherwood Knight was convicted of a rape and murder of Molly McClure.
Knight gets life without parole. But since detectives can't connect him to Susan's murder, her case now goes colder than a winter ice storm in Washington state.
I kept wishing, I kept wanting for the person to be caught, but I think I lost hope that it would ever happen because it just went on for so long. I mean, so long. I had given up hope of ever finding out who did that to my sister, to Sue.
Snohomish County formed the cold case team in February of 2005. November of that year, Gary Schwartz told us that his sister, Susan, had been murdered in 1979, and he wanted us to work on that case. Detective Vanderweist and I went through all the evidence and had it sent off for DNA testing because there was no such thing as DNA back in 1979.
The police collected, I think, almost 100 items of evidence from the scene. And there's invariably some DNA that's going to be found.
The only DNA that came back matched Susan Schwartz. We didn't have any other different profiles.
There was no forensic evidence that helped determine who committed this crime. There was nothing.
Then a phone call to Susan's friend Karen from the mother of Gregory Johnson and Sherwood Knight adds a new mystery to the case.
Over the years, I kept contact with Greg's mom. She was the grandmother of my son. We were talking on the phone, and she said, I got this letter from Cavey or Sherwood, and I'm going to mail it to you. Sherwood Knight is a half-brother to Gregory Johnson. It was from Cavey to Greg saying, you were supposed to help me out while I'm in prison. If you don't help me out within 2 weeks, I'm going to spill the beans on you and let you see what it's been like for me all these years.
Sherwood Knight, he had some medical issues. He didn't want to die in prison. He wrote a letter kind of saying, you better come up with some money for an attorney so that I can pursue my case, or I'm going to tell the crime that you committed.
The letter was interesting because it kind of was cryptic. It didn't really say exactly what it was talking about.
It would have been something really bad. Greg was a very, very terrible person. He was abusive to me from when we got married. He's vicious. I think in the back of my mind, I felt that it had something to do with Sue's murder. I got this letter from Sherwood to Greg saying that if you don't help me out, I'm going to spill the beans on you. I didn't know what to do with the letter. I was shocked, first of all. I just put the letter to the side for 6 months because I was a little bit fearful. Greg was violent, quite violent. I came across the letter again 6 months later, and I decided, I have to do something with this letter. So that's when I decided to mail it to the Snohomish County detectives. I just didn't want the responsibility of having that letter.
There wasn't much to go on with the letter because it was very vague. It didn't specify what Sherwood was talking about when he talked about the secret. The letter did bring Sherwood Knight and Greg Johnson to the top of the list of the possible suspects.
Knight's letter to his half-brother Gregory Johnson doesn't solve the case, but it reminds Karen of all the support Susan gave her 20 years earlier, when she was struggling in an abusive marriage to Johnson.
Sue would tell me, "You don't deserve this, Karen. You need to get out. You can have a better life." Sue helped me leave the first time.
Her friend Karen had stayed with her for a couple of weeks before she was finally able to make the arrangements to get away from Greg Johnson.
She got me out of there. She helped me pack. My son, Greg Jr., was 6 months old when she helped me leave. Greg was so angry that Sue helped me leave him. Two and a half years later, when I found out that Sue was shot, I immediately went back to Washington for the funeral. I called Greg. We actually started to get back together. You have this daydream, this Cinderella dream in the back of your head that he's going to change, but the abuse just continues on. I left Greg for good around 87 or 88. That was the last time I talked to Greg.
Detectives refused to give up on finding Susan's killer. In 2009, they try an innovative tactic, hoping to jumpstart the case.
Our detective in Florida had put out a deck of cold case playing cards and put them into the prisons. And they'd solved more than a half a dozen cases. So if I can put a different homicide on each card with a picture of the victim and put them into the prisons, then they're going to play these cards and be familiar with these cases that they're reading. On the back, it says that Crime Stoppers will pay you a reward if you call in a tip.
The hope was that somebody, in looking at these cards, would be willing to come forward.
The cases that I thought were the most innocent victims, I tried to put them on the aces and the face cards. So we put Susan Schwarz on the Queen of Hearts.
When the deck came out, I was going through and saw that she was the Queen of Hearts. It was so fitting because she was such a tiny, sweet, just big-hearted person. So it was perfect. I cried.
In 2011, Sherwood Knight was thinking about his own situation. He had been playing cards with the other inmates with these cold case cards, and he noticed the picture of Susan.
Sherwood Knight, who was serving a life sentence, said that he had information about who killed Sue Schwarz.
He told us that on the day that Susan Schwarz was murdered, he was down fishing on the pier, and Greg Johnson, his half-brother, drove up.
Greg had told him that, hey, if the police come asking about me, tell them that I was fishing with you on this day. Sherwood said that he asked him why, and Greg responded, because I killed Sue.
Sherwood said he was pretty shocked, and he could see in the car that there was a girl sitting in the front seat. If Greg had just killed Susan, maybe this girl was with him and might know something.
The police knew that Gregory Johnson had a girlfriend, but that was new information to them.
We need to figure out who that girl was.
Locating and talking to Greg's girlfriend would be crucial.
It gave us a lot of hope that we were now on the right track. I thought it was going to be the break in the case. When Sherwood Knight told us that the girlfriend was sitting in the car when Greg was telling him that he killed Susan, we felt that this girlfriend was our prime witness.
We identified her. We had located an address in the Seattle area. We were going to go and see if she had any information.
If the ex-girlfriend, known as MM, is willing to talk to police, she might have vital testimony about the case.
We immediately drove to her address to attempt to talk with her.
We arrived. She put her dogs away. She had 3 or 4 dogs. We sat down in the dining room. She was totally willing to talk about her relationship with Greg Johnson that lasted quite a while.
She confirmed that when she was 17, that she was in a relationship with Greg, that he was physically abusive to her. He choked her, he beat her up.
She was afraid of him, but she was also afraid to leave him.
She gave no indication that she had any knowledge that Greg had done any harm to Sue. After the interview, we explained to her and said, hey, listen, in the crime scene, there were some smaller footprints. So we'd like to get a DNA sample just to rule you out. When I asked her about the DNA, I could see her behavior change. I could see her get defensive, pulling her legs up close to her on the chair, and I could see that she truly seemed to be afraid. She knew something, and she said she didn't want to get involved. And she got up from the chair and said she had to put her dog out.
She gets up and she walks around the table behind me. So I got up behind her and I said, you were there, weren't you? And as she turns over her shoulder, she whispers to me, I was there. And then she says it again, I was there. And she just kind of melts into my chest, and I just give her a big hug. And I said, it's okay. It's okay. She'd been holding this secret for 32 years, and now it was going to be exposed. And you could see that it was just crushing her.
The witness, MM, begins to describe what happened on that terrible day.
Greg said he needed to go for a ride to see somebody. So she got in the car, they pulled up to a house, he went inside, and then he came back out and said, there's somebody in the shower, you need to come with me. So she went to the house.
She observed that there was a woman taking a shower because the bathroom door was open.
Greg directed her to grab some things out of the house and bring it back to the car. She did that. She was sitting there by herself.
When he didn't come out immediately behind her, MM decided, I wonder if he's in there going to rape her because she's nude in the shower. She got back out and went back into the house. And she sees Greg pulling open the shower curtains and grabbing Susan, who's saying, what are you doing in my house? Get out of here. You're not supposed to be here. Leave me alone. And Greg starts beating her with the pistol that he has out in his hand. He pulls her out of the bathtub and ends up forcing her down onto the floor, and he uses this electrical cord to tie her hands behind her back. And she's face down on the floor. The girlfriend ends up watching Greg put a pillow over Susan's head, putting the gun up to the side of her head and pulling the trigger. At that point, he looks up and he sees his girlfriend is in the house and witnessing what he just did. And he shoots Susan 2 more times and then tells his girlfriend that that's what happens to people that mess with me. Don't you ever tell anybody what you saw, or I will kill you and I will kill your mother.
She took that threat very seriously and really thought that at any time if she came forward, that he would track her down.
I'm hanging on every word that she's telling us. We were just so fortunate to have that.
I was excited to sit there and have somebody as an eyewitness. It was just a great feeling. There's no doubt in our mind that she was telling us the truth. We were ecstatic. We knew it was enough to get Greg. Our next step was to go track him down. I was just thrilled that we had found somebody that was an eyewitness, which is very rare.
We knew that this one witness was enough to put Greg away for this murder.
I was eager to go track down Greg.
Gregory Johnson is no longer in prison, but the police look for his last known whereabouts.
We did locate an address for Greg down in Seattle, so myself and Detective Scharf went down to Seattle, went to his house. We saw him coming up the street, and he's eating some popcorn, just kind of casual, carefree. Greg was cooperative. He agreed to talk with us. We sat in the car, interviewed him, but he would not admit any involvement in the murder.
So Pat told him, "You're free to leave if you want to leave." And Greg kind of was nonchalant about it, and he really didn't start walking away. So I got out of the car and told him that he was under arrest for killing Susan Schwarz, and I put my handcuffs on him.
My brother called me to tell me that there had been an arrest. I think the first thing that really hit me when I received the news initially is that overwhelming sense of relief. Because there was always that fear that that person was still out there, maybe harming other people.
Initially, we charged Gregory Johnson with first-degree murder. This particular case, having occurred, 30 years earlier, I started to kind of worry because of the age of it. Are all the witnesses going to be alive? Are they all going to remember? Is there any evidence which has been lost?
The prosecution faces a tough decision: go to trial or offer Gregory Johnson a plea deal.
It made me think that a sure thing, without having to put the victim's family through what's a very traumatic experience, was the right thing to do. And so he engaged in plea negotiations with his attorney.
Anytime you go to trial, there's always the unknown. It only takes one person to have a jury to have doubt.
Gregory Johnson pled guilty to a second-degree murder charge. Our recommendation was 298 months, which is almost 25 years. The judge did follow that during the sentencing.
I wanted him in there for life. I didn't want to do any kind of a plea deal, but we didn't really have a choice. The evidence it wasn't there, and he could have ended up walking away.
In a brutal murder like what happened to Susan Schwarz, I don't think justice is ever served. I don't think there's any sentence that can make it right, that can provide justice. But I felt at the end of the day that Gregory Johnson got an appropriate sentence.
Gregory Johnson pleads guilty, but he never accepts personal responsibility for killing Susan Schwarz.
During the sentencing, he blamed Susan for what he called meddling in his relationship, when really she was just being a compassionate friend. He showed no remorse for having killed her.
She was meddling in his business. She was best friends with your wife who you were beating on. She wasn't meddling, she was being a friend.
I never imagined that Greg was capable of murder. It used to make me feel guilty that I'd ever introduced him to Sue. Now it just makes me mad.
I believe she was killed for the simple fact of helping her friend. And that's what this whole thing comes down to. And that makes it even worse for me. I am still really conflicted about the witness. Yes, I am, first and foremost, grateful to her. But I'm also frustrated with the witness because of the fact that it literally took us almost 32 years to get the information that we needed. If you have information, tell somebody. Let people know so that families like mine don't have to wonder for decades and decades who did this horrible thing to their family. I really wish we'd gotten the information sooner, a lot sooner.
Sue is special. She was just a good person, and we just don't have that many good people in this world anymore.
She just died too young. She didn't have a chance. We don't know what things she could have done. And we never will. Because somebody decided to take that away from us. I miss her. I miss what could have been. I'm sorry that this happened to you. I wish I could take it back. I love you. And I'll never stop loving you.
The call came in at 3:17 a.m., the kind of hour when the city of Michigan sleeps with one eye open and every street lamp casts long shadows across empty sidewalks. A patrol officer answered, thinking it would be a routine noise complaint, another restless neighbor calling about a barking dog or a late-night argument. But the address was familiar to him. Maplewood Drive, a street lined with tidy houses, freshly painted fences, and lawns clipped with precision. The officer approached, the tires crunching over frost-hardened gravel, and that's when he saw it. The front door of number 42, swinging open like a yawning mouth. Inside, a faint glow from a hall lamp spilled into the darkness. The air carried a strange, coppery scent, faint yet unmistakable, hanging over the quiet like a warning. He reached for his flashlight, gripping the handle as if it could protect him, stepping into the house where nothing would ever feel safe again. The home belonged to the Harrisons, a family the neighborhood knew but barely noticed. They had blended into the background for years, waving at neighbors, keeping to themselves, the kind of people you barely remembered but whose faces were vaguely familiar. On the surface, they had no enemies, no scandal, no secrets, or so everyone thought. But tonight, the facade had been ripped open. The officer moved cautiously through the living room, eyes scanning the furniture, the overturned chairs, the broken lamp lying like a casualty in the center of the floor. A photograph of the family on the mantel was tilted, the frame dusted with fingerprints. And then he found her. In the back room, the body of Laura Harrison lay sprawled across the carpet, her eyes staring blankly, yet alive with a frozen scream no one could hear. The sight was enough to send shivers crawling along the spine of anyone who stumbled upon it unprepared. This was a scene of violence, calculated or impulsive. It didn't yet matter. What mattered was that the life had ended, and the questions began faster than the morning light. How had this happened? Who would do such a thing? Why here? Why now? The officer radioed for backup, his voice steady despite the churn of adrenaline and disbelief. Within minutes, the street filled with flashing red and blue lights. Neighbors emerging from the foggy dark, drawn by instinct, curiosity, fear. They whispered among themselves, offering guesses that sounded plausible but quickly dissolved under the weight of the unknown. A robbery gone wrong? A lover's quarrel turned fatal? A stranger? Every theory collided with another until truth was impossible to see. Detectives arrived, taking control of the scene, their shoes creaking on wooden floors as they moved methodically, measuring, photographing, bagging evidence with meticulous hands that trembled only slightly under the gravity of what they were cataloging. Fibers, hair, blood smears. Each piece of evidence promised answers that weren't ready to speak. The investigation began immediately, combing the neighborhood, questioning residents. Did you hear anything? Did anyone strange pass by that night? A car idling too long? Footsteps? Most neighbors shrugged or shook their heads. Memories of distant noises blurred into uncertainty. One man mentioned a thud at 2 a.m., though he wasn't sure if it was real or imagined. A woman recalled a car that wasn't usually parked on the street, its driver unknown. Each tip felt like a breadcrumb in a forest where the paths twisted and ended abruptly. Leads appeared, then dissolved, leaving investigators pacing hallways and corridors with files stacked like towers of frustration. Meanwhile, inside the evidence room, items collected were sealed and logged meticulously. A torn piece of carpet with a dark stain, a fragment of glass, a partial fingerprint pressed into a small plastic bag. Everything was cataloged, labeled, and stored. At the time, the technology to fully unlock the secrets these pieces held simply did not exist. DNA profiling was in its infancy. Fingerprints were compared manually, and intuition carried the day. Detectives ran comparisons, checked criminal records, and interviewed anyone who might have had even the faintest connection. Alibis were cross-checked, stories dissected. Every potential suspect became a shadow under the bright light of questioning. Some cleared quickly, others lingering as possibilities that refused resolution. Weeks passed, then months. The case file grew heavy with documentation. Handwritten notes, typed reports, photographs layered upon photographs. And yet, nothing congealed into a clear picture of what had happened or who was responsible. The community grew wary, sleep disturbed by memories of sirens and the unsettling knowledge that danger had walked among them unnoticed. Parents kept doors locked. Children were watched more closely. Casual conversations stopped in mid-sentence. The neighborhood had been fractured, trust shredded quietly over years of familiarity that now felt illusory. Investigators cycled through the case, experienced detectives retiring, fresh officers taking their place. The case lingered on the edge of attention, active yet unsolved, the kind of file that collected dust in an office while holding the raw, unprocessed grief of a family and a community. The term cold case had not yet been applied, but the conditions were forming. Years of stagnation, leads that evaporated, evidence that could not yet answer questions. Technology evolved outside the walls of the evidence room. DNA became a language investigators could finally read. Databases grew, connecting distant dots with a precision previously unimaginable. Other cases that had seemed impossible were solved, perpetrators identified, justice served. The Harrison case, however, sat patiently, frozen in time, its secrets locked in stains and fibers, in handwriting and photographs, in human memory that was already fading. The family endured holidays in subdued silence, marking anniversaries with quiet reflection, their grief a private constant. The community moved forward outwardly, replacing fences, repainting houses, planting new lawns, yet beneath the surface, the story of that night lingered like a shadow that refused light. It was a wound that would not heal, a question without an answer, a reminder of how quickly safety can be stolen. Decades would pass before anyone revisited the evidence with modern eyes. The partial fingerprint, once meaningless, would find its match. The stain that had baffled early investigators would speak through the language of DNA. And when the case was reopened, it would not just be an investigation. It would be a reckoning. The term cold case would finally find its place on the folder, neat and impersonal, a label that masks the human cost of every day spent without resolution. And yet, in that evidence room, in that quiet, the truth had been waiting all along. Patient, silent, like a coiled snake, ready to strike once the world was finally ready to listen. Every misstep, every dead end, every year of waiting only sharpened the eventual revelation. The officer who first entered the house, the neighbors who watched from the street, the detectives who first walked the hallways, they had unknowingly participated in a story that demanded patience, a story that would not end until it chose to. Michigan, 1984. A house on Maplewood Drive, an open door, a frightened officer, a life cut short. Evidence packed away, overlooked, dismissed as routine. And yet, beneath the surface, beneath years of dust and forgotten memories, the pieces of a puzzle awaited the hands capable of reading them. Every cold case carries this promise. That time does not erase truth. It only hides it, challenging those willing to chase shadows long after the streets have gone quiet, long after the sirens have stopped, long after everyone has learned to forget. Somewhere in that silence, decades before the world would catch up, the evidence whispered. A fiber clung stubbornly to a carpet. A fingerprint etched itself into plastic. A stain waited patiently in a bag. And one day it would speak. Justice would arrive, not quickly, not as anyone expected, but with a certainty forged by the slow, relentless passage of time. And when it did, the neighborhood, the family, and the officers who had witnessed that first morning would finally understand that nothing, not even decades, can bury the truth forever. Years passed, and the Harrison case settled into the quiet despair of the unsolved. Each anniversary brought whispered memories, fresh grief mingled with old, as if time had layered sadness upon sadness, leaving the family and the community trapped in a slow-motion nightmare. Neighbors spoke of the night in hushed tones, recalling shadows in the street, cars that had come and gone, and the fleeting sense of something wrong that no one could quite pinpoint. Children who played near the Harrisons' house had grown up with a sense of unease, a feeling that the neighborhood was safer only by illusion. Adults kept doors locked, checked locks twice, and glanced over their shoulders at every unfamiliar face. Detectives who had initially worked the case moved on to other investigations. Some retired, leaving their notes and photographs behind in dusty cabinets. Others became consumed with new crimes, new mysteries, while the Harrison case remained suspended in a limbo between memory and evidence. The term cold case began to be whispered in departmental hallways, a quiet acknowledgement that the crime had not faded from memory, but had become unsolvable with the tools of the time. It was a file stacked among others, marked with yellowing tape, its edges frayed, photographs curling at the corners, each image a frozen scream that refused to fade. Technological advances began to change the landscape of criminal investigations. DNA analysis emerged as a tool of unprecedented power. Fingerprints could be digitized and compared across databases, and cold cases that once seemed impervious to resolution suddenly yielded to science. Yet the Harrison case resisted, a stubborn riddle hiding within the chaos of a life cut short. Every fiber, every stain, every piece of glass was cataloged and preserved, but the evidence itself seemed to taunt investigators, speaking in silence while years rolled past like heavy clouds. The neighborhood moved forward. Fences were repainted, lawns manicured, and families came and went. Yet the house on Maplewood Drive remained a focal point for unease. Its empty rooms and tilted photographs became an unspoken monument to the past. New residents moved in and out, sensing a lingering shadow, a weight of history they could not understand but could feel. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind across the porch seemed to carry the memory of that night, a constant reminder that violence had visited and left a scar that time could not erase. Law enforcement revisited the case periodically. Every few years, a new detective would open the file and scan the photographs, re-examine the evidence, and call witnesses. Memories had faded. Witnesses had moved, but fragments remained. A neighbor remembered a peculiar car idling on the street. Another recalled seeing a figure at the window, but details were hazy, distorted by time. Each lead was pursued with meticulous care, yet every trail seemed to end abruptly, dissolving into uncertainty. The case became a study in patience, a test of endurance, a challenge to anyone willing to follow the threads of a story that refused to be fully told. Inside the evidence room, nothing was truly forgotten. Bags containing trace fibers, a fragment of a broken vase, partial fingerprints, and the stain that had first alerted officers sat neatly on shelves. Every item was logged with care, the handwriting of long-retired officers still visible in meticulous script. Although no one could have predicted it at the time, the tools to unlock the secrets these pieces contained were gradually approaching the threshold of possibility. DNA databases were expanding. Technology could now read the microscopic language embedded in hair and skin cells, and patterns previously invisible would soon become clear. Meanwhile, the family endured life with a constant weight of absence. Holidays were muted, birthdays carried a hollow echo, and the world outside the home moved forward with a casual disregard for the shadow that had entered their lives. Their grief became a silent companion, one that others could see but never fully understand. Friends drifted, conversations dwindled, and yet within the household, the memory of Laura Harrison remained vivid, her absence both a wound and a symbol, unhealed but constant. Detectives returning to the case found that time had changed the landscape of criminal investigation. Every fingerprint and sample stored from the original scene could now be re-examined, compared with databases that had grown exponentially. The stain on the carpet, previously a minor note in a long report, became a key, waiting for the tools to read it. Investigators began to believe that the day of reckoning was approaching, that the slumbering truth within the evidence room would not remain silent forever. Across the city, other cold cases had been solved, often through a combination of persistence and technology. Investigators saw how once impossible leads became clear, how anonymous tips coupled with modern forensic science could upend decades of stagnation. Each breakthrough brought hope, a reminder that time, while relentless, also had the capacity to reveal hidden truths. The Harrison case remained among the most stubborn, yet every solved crime reinforced the possibility that the pieces could align, that the past could finally speak. The first step in reopening the case began quietly. A new detective, recently assigned to cold cases, requested access to the Harrison file. She meticulously reviewed every note, every photograph, every piece of collected evidence. The broken lamp, the overturned chair, the faint fingerprint on the doorknob. Each item was revisited with fresh eyes. The detective noticed patterns that had been overlooked, a slight discrepancy in witness statements, a misfiled sample that could now be analyzed with advanced DNA testing. It was the beginning of a slow unraveling, a delicate work that would require months of labor, attention to detail, and relentless patience. As the investigation rekindled, the neighborhood felt the subtle tremors of change. Residents noticed increased police activity, the faint return of flashing lights in the streets, the sound of officers consulting quietly on porches and in alleyways. Conversations once abandoned were reignited. People shared memories, recalled details, and pieced together fragments of a story long dormant. Each testimony, each recollection, brought the investigation closer to resolution, yet still cloaked in uncertainty. The tension was palpable, the sense of inevitability mixed with anxiety. Would the perpetrator be found, or would the case remain a ghostly presence, haunting the community indefinitely? Meanwhile, forensic analysis began producing results. The partial fingerprint, once considered inconclusive, matched a profile in the national database. Hair samples, long stored, revealed DNA that could now be compared with greater accuracy. Each match was a spark, illuminating corners of the case that had been dark for decades. Investigators felt a cautious optimism. tempered by the recognition that the years of delay had allowed the perpetrator to become adept at hiding in plain sight. Nevertheless, the data provided direction, a path forward where previously there had been none. With renewed leads, detectives focused on suspects who had been in proximity to the Harrison family at the time of the murder. Background checks, alibis, and associations were scrutinized. People once considered peripheral were now central. Those who had been overlooked gained prominence. Every interview was conducted with precision. Every statement compared against the growing body of forensic evidence. The case, once dormant, began to pulse with life, each beat bringing the possibility of confrontation, arrest, and answers. The family, now older, experienced a resurgence of emotions. Memories long tucked away resurfaced with a clarity that was both comforting and painful. They followed news updates, police press releases, and watched as investigators worked tirelessly to assemble the pieces. The hope of resolution brought nervous energy, a fragile anticipation that had the power to heal, yet also the capacity to reopen wounds. They lived in the tension of possibility, every day measured by the slow approach of truth. Months of painstaking work culminated in a breakthrough. A DNA match connected the evidence from Maplewood Drive to a suspect with a criminal record. Investigators coordinated quietly, planning a carefully timed operation to ensure the arrest would be safe and effective. The community, unaware of the exact developments, continued life under the shadow of uncertainty, completely unprepared for the shock that would soon arrive. As the arrest was executed in the early hours, neighbors reported the unusual sight of unmarked cars, officers moving swiftly yet silently, doors opening and closing with decisive action. The suspect, once hidden behind years of anonymity and routine, was taken into custody without incident. The culmination of decades of investigation, technological advancement, and relentless human determination had reached a dramatic crescendo. Michigan's 1984 cold case, long considered a ghost story among law enforcement circles, finally produced justice. The arrest brought answers to lingering questions, relief to the family, and closure to a community that had lived for decades with the uncertainty of violence so close to home. The work was far from over. Trials, testimony, and final convictions awaited, but the first step had been taken. The silent evidence in the evidence room, the overlooked clues, and the persistent investigators had together forged a path from mystery to resolution. In the end, the Harrison case proved that truth cannot remain hidden forever. Time may obscure it, circumstances may delay it, and human memory may falter, but when the right tools and determined minds converge, the past can finally speak. Michigan learned that cold cases are never truly cold. They are waiting, patient and silent, until the moment arrives when justice demands that they be heard. The morning after the arrest, the streets of Maplewood Drive were unusually still. Neighbors peeked through blinds, some holding coffee cups with trembling hands, others standing frozen on sidewalks, witnessing the aftermath of a decades-old nightmare being confronted. News vans arrived, cameras flashed, microphones waved in the air, and reporters began piecing together the story that had haunted the community for over 30 years. The once forgotten house of the Harrisons now became the center of national attention, its quiet facade suddenly charged with decades of tension, grief, and unanswered questions. Inside the house, detectives combed every room once again, ensuring all evidence was accounted for, cross-referencing notes, photographs, and forensic samples. The walls, once silent witnesses, seemed almost to exhale, revealing the hidden history of that fateful night in 1984. Every corner told a story. The living room where Laura had last been seen alive, the staircase that bore the marks of struggle, the kitchen where an overturned chair now symbolized the violence that had erupted so suddenly. These details, preserved over the decades, formed a narrative that the investigators could finally interpret with modern tools and fresh insight. The suspect, whose arrest shocked neighbors and friends alike, was transported quietly, escorted through a maze of law enforcement vehicles. His face, calm yet tense, betrayed nothing, but his presence alone rekindled the questions that had long plagued the community. Why then? Why there? Why him? Investigators reviewed old interviews, revisited witness statements, and contrasted alibis with new forensic findings. Patterns began to emerge, revealing a chilling consistency between what had been observed 30 years prior and what the evidence now confirmed. Meanwhile, forensic scientists began a detailed re-examination of the crime scene evidence. The bloodstains that had once been minor notes in a bulky report were now analyzed with sophisticated DNA techniques. Fibers collected from the carpet, fragments of clothing, and even faint fingerprints were scrutinized under new light, literally and figuratively. Each tiny particle was now a messenger from the past, translating decades of silence into answers. What had once been indecipherable was now coherent. The language of evidence, long ignored or misunderstood, spoke clearly, pointing investigators toward the truth they had chased for generations. The family of Laura Harrison watched every development cautiously, their lives caught between relief and lingering grief. The years had changed them, etched lines of sorrow and resilience across their faces. Memories returned in vivid flashes, the sound of footsteps on the stairs, Laura's laughter in the hallway, the sudden, terrifying silence that had followed. As the investigation progressed, each revelation stirred both comfort and anguish, a complex cocktail of emotions that no words could fully capture. The arrest brought validation, but also reopened wounds that time had only partially healed. Community meetings were convened, both officially and informally, as neighbors sought to make sense of the shocking developments. Some spoke of guilt, wondering if they could have done more to prevent the tragedy, while others expressed cautious hope that justice, long delayed, was finally within reach. The local newspaper ran feature articles, and television news segments broadcast interviews with residents who had witnessed the tension, the whispers, and the fear that had permeated the neighborhood for decades. Every retelling seemed to add new layers of detail, some long forgotten, others merely reframed through the lens of the current investigation. Law enforcement agencies coordinated carefully to maintain the integrity of the case. With modern forensic technology, the old evidence files were reopened and reanalyzed. DNA from the partial samples, which had remained inconclusive for decades, now produced definitive matches. The fingerprint on the kitchen doorknob, once a minor curiosity, confirmed the suspect's presence. Even fibers that had seemed insignificant now tied the suspect directly to the crime scene. Each forensic breakthrough reinforced the growing certainty. The truth, long obscured, was now undeniable. Detectives retraced the suspect's movements on the night of the murder, using both old witness reports and modern investigative methods. Security camera footage from nearby businesses, previously overlooked or unavailable, was now accessible thanks to digital archiving and advanced video analysis. Patterns emerged. A vehicle spotted near the Harrison house, a figure seen walking away from the street under the cover of darkness, and timing that aligned perfectly with witness testimonies from 1984. The evidence, once fragmented and indecipherable, coalesced into a clear, horrifying narrative of premeditation, opportunity, and concealment. As the legal process began, prosecutors and defense attorneys prepared for the trial. Investigators provided exhaustive reports detailing every forensic match, every eyewitness account, and every timeline reconstruction. Each piece was carefully documented, ensuring that the decades of work would withstand scrutiny in court. The community, meanwhile, braced itself for the emotional weight of the proceedings. The prospect of public testimonies, the recounting of horrific details, and the reliving of trauma threatened to reopen old wounds. Yet the promise of justice provided a counterbalance to the pain. Throughout the trial preparations, media coverage intensified. Journalists delved into the history of the Harrison family, the early days of the investigation, and the long-standing frustration of law enforcement. Public interest soared as people across the nation followed the story, captivated by the resilience of those who refused to let a violent crime fade into obscurity. Social media amplified the narrative, with citizens debating theories, sharing memories, and expressing astonishment at the technological advances that had enabled the arrest. The case, once a forgotten tragedy, became a symbol of perseverance and the relentless pursuit of justice. Finally, the suspect faced questioning. Interrogations were precise, guided by both psychological strategy and the weight of incontrovertible evidence. Law enforcement pressed carefully, revealing the forensic matches and pointing out discrepancies in the suspect's past statements. The tension in the room was palpable. Every word, every pause, carried the weight of decades of unanswered questions. The suspect's demeanor shifted subtly as the undeniable truth of the DNA evidence and fingerprint matches was presented. Even those experienced in interrogation noted the subtle signs of recognition, the slight shifts in posture, and the faint quiver in the voice as the gravity of the evidence sank in. Meanwhile, the Harrison family prepared to attend the proceedings, navigating a complex mixture of hope, anxiety, and lingering grief. The legal battle ahead promised answers, closure, and the possibility of justice finally served. Yet the emotional toll of reliving memories, confronting the horrors of that night, and witnessing the unraveling of a long-held mystery weighed heavily. Support networks, friends, therapists, and extended family helped them navigate the emotional landscape, providing strength for the challenging days ahead. As the trial date approached, the community's anticipation grew. Local businesses displayed subtle signs of solidarity. Neighbors spoke openly about the impact of the crime, and law enforcement officers reflected on the unusual convergence of old evidence, modern technology, and sheer persistence that had led to this point. The story of the Harrison case, once a ghostly memory, became a lesson in vigilance, resilience, and the power of science to illuminate truths hidden for decades. Through it all, the case demonstrated a crucial point. No matter how much time passes, the truth can be uncovered. Evidence, carefully preserved, human memory, and modern scientific methods can converge to expose hidden crimes. For the Harrisons, the suspect's arrest marked the end of an era of silence. For the community, it provided a form of collective catharsis, an acknowledgement that what had happened would not be forgotten, and that justice, even when delayed, could finally arrive. The Harrison cold case, once an indelible stain on the city's history, now entered a new chapter. Decades of uncertainty had ended, replaced by the painstaking reconstruction of events, the meticulous analysis of evidence, and the long-awaited confrontation with the individual responsible. The case became a testament to the idea that no crime, no matter how carefully concealed, can remain unsolved indefinitely. The weight of history, combined with modern forensic ingenuity, had finally brought the past into the light, allowing the community to begin the slow process of healing, reflection, and closure. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation as spectators, journalists, and family members gathered to witness the trial of a man accused of a crime that had haunted Maplewood Drive for decades. Cameras clicked relentlessly, capturing every moment, while reporters scribbled furiously, attempting to translate the complex web of forensic evidence into headlines and sound bites. Inside, the judge called the court to order, and the room fell into a hush that was both oppressive and expectant. Every eye was fixed on the suspect, whose calm demeanor belied the storm of facts slowly closing in. Opening statements set the tone. Prosecutors painted a vivid picture of a night-long past, but vividly reconstructed, weaving together evidence from the crime scene, newly analyzed DNA, and overlooked witnesses. They described the terror that had gripped the Harrisons, the struggle that ensued, and the lingering questions that had plagued investigators for decades. Each statement was precise, deliberate, designed to build a narrative that was impossible to ignore. Defense attorneys, conversely, attempted to sow doubt, challenging the reliability of decades-old memories, questioning the chain of custody for evidence, and highlighting the passage of time as a potential source of error. Forensic experts were called to testify, their voices calm but authoritative, describing in meticulous detail the modern analyses that had unraveled the mystery. Blood samples preserved for over 30 years were tested with cutting-edge DNA technology, producing matches that linked the suspect directly to the scene. Fibers and fingerprints, once dismissed as inconclusive, now served as incontrovertible evidence. Each revelation sent ripples through the courtroom, gasps from the audience, scribbles from reporters, and a subtle tightening of the suspect's jaw. The facts, once dormant, now commanded attention and shaped perception. Witnesses from the original investigation were summoned. Some had aged visibly, their faces lined with the weight of time, memories, and trauma. They recounted details that had been buried in old reports. A glimpse of a shadow at the window, the sound of hurried footsteps in the night, and subtle clues that had seemed insignificant at the time. Their testimonies were poignant, stirring, and at times heart-wrenching, reminding everyone present of the human cost of the crime and the enduring anxiety that had lingered in the neighborhood for decades. Meanwhile, the suspect's demeanor fluctuated subtly under scrutiny. Under the relentless questioning of seasoned attorneys, inconsistencies emerged, and the weight of forensic certainty pressed in. Every denial, every hesitation, was dissected with precision, each moment analyzed by both the courtroom audience and the broader public following the trial through media coverage. The interplay between the unyielding scientific evidence and the human reactions, the subtle twitches, the shifting gaze, created a tension that was palpable, almost cinematic, as if the room itself were holding its breath. In parallel, the prosecution introduced recreations of the crime scene, reconstructed digitally and physically to illustrate the sequence of events. The living room, frozen in time, the staircase scarred with the marks of struggle, and the kitchen still holding the chair that had toppled in panic, all were presented to the jury and the public, bridging the decades between the crime and its investigation. These visualizations transformed abstract reports into tangible reality, allowing everyone to grasp the horror, the chaos, and the precision with which the crime had been committed. The trial progressed with the defense attempting to dismantle the narrative through alternative explanations. They questioned the reliability of witness recollections, suggested the possibility of contamination in evidence storage, and emphasized the challenges of prosecuting a decades-old case. Yet, each attempt was met with counterarguments, each theory systematically deconstructed by forensic experts, timelines, and corroborating evidence. Slowly, the jury's focus shifted toward the undeniable weight of the facts, their attention drawn to the meticulous alignment between past events and present proof. Community members attended the trial in varying states of anticipation and anxiety. Some sought closure, others a sense of vindication for the years of fear and suspicion that had permeated their lives. Conversations outside the courthouse revolved around memories of the night in 1984, the long wait for justice, and the remarkable technological advances that had enabled investigators to finally identify the suspect. For many, the trial was more than a legal proceeding. It was a reckoning with the past, a public confrontation with the shadows that had loomed over the neighborhood for decades. Media coverage intensified with live broadcasts, interviews, and analyses dissecting every element of the trial. Commentators debated the implications of modern forensic science on cold cases, the emotional toll on families, and the societal fascination with crimes solved after decades of uncertainty. Social media amplified public engagement, with communities across the country sharing reflections, expressing astonishment at the persistent dedication of law enforcement, and discussing the interplay between evidence, time, and justice. The Harrison case became a symbol of the intersection between human perseverance and scientific advancement. As closing arguments approached, the courtroom became a crucible of emotion. Prosecutors emphasized the painstaking work, the relentless pursuit of truth, and the irrefutable nature of the evidence linking the suspect to the crime. Defense attorneys appealed to doubt, the fallibility of memory, and the limits of evidence stretched across decades. Every word resonated with weight. Every pause amplified tension, and the collective attention of the courtroom was drawn to the impending verdict, the moment when decades of investigation and anticipation would finally converge. The jury retired, leaving the courtroom in suspense. Outside, the city held its breath, residents and media alike acutely aware that the fate of a man and the closure for a community hung in balance. Weeks of preparation, decades of investigation, and countless hours of painstaking forensic work culminated in this moment of waiting, a pause charged with anticipation, anxiety, and the hope that justice, delayed but not denied, would prevail. In these moments, the full weight of the Harrison cold case was palpable. It was a story of human resilience, the enduring power of evidence, and the unyielding pursuit of truth. Decades of uncertainty had tested the community, strained relationships, and left scars that would take years to heal. Yet the arrest, the trial, and the imminent verdict offered a measure of resolution, an acknowledgement that the shadows of the past could be illuminated and that the voices of victims, long silent, could finally be heard. The courtroom, poised at the edge of revelation, encapsulated the convergence of time, science, and human determination. Every participant, jurors, attorneys, witnesses, and observers, became part of a story that spanned generations, a narrative that proved the past, no matter how deeply buried, could not remain hidden indefinitely. In the waiting, in the silence, in the collective anticipation, the community experienced the haunting, profound truth of justice pursued with patience, precision, and relentless commitment. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation as spectators, journalists, and family members gathered to witness the trial of a man accused of a crime that had haunted Maplewood Drive for decades. Cameras clicked relentlessly, capturing every moment, while reporters scribbled furiously, attempting to translate the complex web of forensic evidence into headlines and sound bites. Inside, the judge called the court to order, and the room fell into a hush that was both oppressive and expectant. Every eye was fixed on the suspect, whose calm demeanor belied the storm of facts slowly closing in. Opening statements set the tone. Prosecutors painted a vivid picture of a night-long past, but vividly reconstructed, weaving together evidence from the crime scene, newly analyzed DNA, and overlooked witnesses. They described the terror that had gripped the Harrisons, the struggle that ensued, and the lingering questions that had plagued investigators for decades. Each statement was precise, deliberate, designed to build a narrative that was impossible to ignore. Defense attorneys, conversely, attempted to sow doubt, challenging the reliability of decades-old memories, questioning the chain of custody for evidence, and highlighting the passage of time as a potential source of error. Forensic experts were called to testify, their voices calm but authoritative, describing in meticulous detail the modern analyses that had unraveled the mystery. Blood samples preserved for over 30 years were tested with cutting-edge DNA technology, producing matches that linked the suspect directly to the scene. Fibers and fingerprints, once dismissed as inconclusive, now served as incontrovertible evidence. Each revelation sent ripples through the courtroom, gasps from the audience, scribbles from reporters, and the subtle tightening of the suspect's jaw. The facts, once dormant, now commanded attention and shaped perception. Witnesses from the original investigation were summoned. Some had aged visibly, their faces lined with the weight of time, memories, and trauma. They recounted details that had been buried in old reports. A glimpse of a shadow at the window, the sound of hurried footsteps in the night, and subtle clues that had seemed insignificant at the time. Their testimonies were poignant, stirring, and at times heart-wrenching, reminding everyone present of the human cost of the crime and the enduring anxiety that had lingered in the neighborhood for decades. Meanwhile, the suspect's demeanor fluctuated subtly under scrutiny. Under the relentless questioning of seasoned attorneys, inconsistencies emerged, and the weight of forensic certainty pressed in. Every denial, every hesitation, was dissected with precision, each moment analyzed by both the courtroom audience and the broader public following the trial through media coverage. The interplay between the unyielding scientific evidence and the human reactions, the subtle twitches, the shifting gaze, created a tension that was palpable, almost cinematic, as if the room itself were holding its breath. In parallel, the prosecution introduced recreations of the crime scene, reconstructed digitally and physically to illustrate the sequence of events. The living room, frozen in time, the staircase scarred with the marks of struggle, and the kitchen still holding the chair that had toppled in panic. All were presented to the jury and the public, bridging the decades between the crime and its investigation. These visualizations transformed abstract reports into tangible reality, allowing everyone to grasp the horror, the chaos, and the precision with which the crime had been committed. The trial progressed with the defense attempting to dismantle the narrative through alternative explanations. They questioned the reliability of witness recollections, suggested the possibility of contamination in evidence storage, and emphasized the challenges of prosecuting a decades-old case. Yet, each attempt was met with counterarguments, each theory systematically deconstructed by forensic experts, timelines, and corroborating evidence. Slowly, the jury's focus shifted toward the undeniable weight of the facts, their attention drawn to the meticulous alignment between past events and present proof. Community members attended the trial in varying states of anticipation and anxiety. Some sought closure, others a sense of vindication for the years of fear and suspicion that had permeated their lives. Conversations outside the courthouse revolved around memories of the night in 1984, the long wait for justice, and the remarkable technological advances that had enabled investigators to finally identify the suspect. For many, the trial was more than a legal proceeding. It was a reckoning with the past, a public confrontation with the shadows that had loomed over the neighborhood for decades. Media coverage intensified with live broadcasts, interviews, and analyses dissecting every element of the trial. Commentators debated the implications of modern forensic science on cold cases, the emotional toll on families, and the societal fascination with crimes solved after decades of uncertainty. Social media amplified public engagement, with communities across the country sharing reflections, expressing astonishment at the persistent dedication of law enforcement, and discussing the interplay between evidence, time, and justice. The Harrison case became a symbol of the intersection between human perseverance and scientific advancement. As closing arguments approached, the courtroom became a crucible of emotion. Prosecutors emphasized the painstaking work, the relentless pursuit of truth, and the irrefutable nature of the evidence linking the suspect to the crime. Defense attorneys appealed to doubt, the fallibility of memory, and the limits of evidence stretched across decades. Every word resonated with weight. Every pause amplified tension, and the collective attention of the courtroom was drawn to the impending verdict, the moment when decades of investigation and anticipation would finally converge. The jury retired, leaving the courtroom in suspense. Outside, the city held its breath, residents and media alike acutely aware that the fate of a man and the closure for a community hung in balance. Weeks of preparation, decades of investigation, and countless hours of painstaking forensic work culminated in this moment of waiting, a pause charged with anticipation, anxiety, and the hope that justice, delayed but not denied, would prevail. In these moments, the full weight of the Harrison cold case was palpable. It was a story of human resilience, the enduring power of evidence, and the unyielding pursuit of truth. Decades of uncertainty had tested the community, strained relationships, and left scars that would take years to heal. Yet the arrest, the trial, and the imminent verdict offered a measure of resolution, an acknowledgement that the shadows of the past could be illuminated and that the voices of victims, long silent, could finally be heard. The courtroom, poised at the edge of revelation, encapsulated the convergence of time, science, and human determination. Every participant, jurors, attorneys, witnesses, and observers, became part of a story that spanned generations, a narrative that proved the past, no matter how deeply buried, could not remain hidden indefinitely. In the waiting, in the silence, in the collective anticipation, the community experienced the haunting, profound truth of justice pursued with patience, precision, and relentless commitment. The jury returned after hours of deliberation, the quiet footsteps echoing ominously in the courtroom as the foreperson took their place to deliver the verdict that had been decades in the making. Families held their breath, journalists scribbled feverishly, and the suspect's eyes flickered with tension that betrayed the mask of calm he had maintained throughout the proceedings. Outside, news vans lined the streets, cameras trained on the courthouse steps, waiting to capture the reaction of a city that had slept uneasily for more than 30 years, haunted by a crime that had defied resolution. The foreperson's voice was steady but resonant, carrying across the room. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts." A collective intake of breath swept through the gallery. Shock, relief, and disbelief collided in waves, ricocheting off the polished wood and muted walls. Some sobbed quietly, clutching one another in silent relief that justice had finally arrived. Others stared in stunned silence, the weight of decades pressing down in a moment of revelation. For the Harrisons, the verdict was a vindication, a long-awaited affirmation that their voices, once drowned out by fear and uncertainty, had been heard. As the gavel struck, marking the legal acknowledgement of guilt, memories of the fateful night in 1984 returned vividly. The fractured windows, the overturned furniture, the muffled cries that had pierced the darkness, all came flooding back with an intensity sharpened by the decades-long absence of closure. Investigators recalled the early days of the case, combing through evidence that seemed mundane at the time, chasing leads that vanished into dead ends, and facing the frustration of technological limitations that had once rendered the truth elusive. Every misstep, every overlooked clue, now served as a testament to the relentless dedication that had ultimately unraveled the mystery. The courtroom slowly emptied, but the emotional resonance lingered like a shadow that refused to dissipate. News outlets pounced, broadcasting the verdict live, dissecting the painstaking investigative work, and interviewing community members whose lives had been touched by fear and speculation for years. Analysts debated the implications of forensic breakthroughs, the significance of preserved evidence, and the challenges of prosecuting crimes long past. Across the city, citizens gathered around televisions and smartphones, witnessing a story that had spanned generations, connecting the past and present in a narrative of persistence, science, and moral reckoning. Meanwhile, law enforcement officers reflected on the journey that had led to this moment. Cold case units, once relegated to the sidelines, had meticulously re-examined every scrap of evidence. Advances in DNA analysis, fingerprint technology, and digital reconstruction had transformed what was once a hopeless pursuit into a triumph of methodical patience and scientific precision. Interviews were revisited, new leads pursued, and connections that had previously been invisible now emerged in stark relief. The arrest and the subsequent conviction symbolized more than justice for one family. It represented the power of persistence, the enduring capacity to uncover truth against the weight of time. The media coverage painted a vivid picture. Headlines screamed of the decades-old mystery finally solved. Community members shared their recollections of fear and suspicion, and the suspect's past was dissected in detail. The narrative framed the crime as a dark chapter in the city's history, now illuminated by the unrelenting pursuit of justice. Public fascination with cold cases intensified, and experts debated how this case exemplified both the evolution of investigative science and the ethical responsibility to pursue unresolved crimes regardless of the passage of time. Yet, beyond the headlines and legal affirmations, the emotional aftermath was profound. Families who had lived under a cloud of uncertainty felt a mix of relief and lingering unease. The scars left by fear, the erosion of trust in a community once shattered by violence, could not be erased by a verdict alone. Neighbors whispered about the night of the crime, the strange behaviors they had observed, and the subtle tensions that had always lingered in the shadow of unsolved mysteries. The community's collective memory had been shaped as much by rumor and speculation as by facts, and the trial served to realign perception with reality, offering clarity amid the chaos of recollection. In the days that followed, discussions swirled around the role of technology in solving cold cases. Podcasts, documentaries, and news features explore the intersections of memory, evidence, and time, emphasizing the extraordinary efforts required to preserve and analyze decades-old materials. The Harrison case became a template for law enforcement strategies, demonstrating how persistence, combined with scientific innovation, could overturn the most stubborn uncertainties. Lessons were drawn, methodologies analyzed, and a broader dialogue about justice, closure, and societal responsibility unfolded in public consciousness. Simultaneously, attention turned inward for many directly affected by the crime. Survivors grappled with the emotional weight of revisiting trauma, confronting memories long suppressed, and integrating the reality of the verdict into their lives. Therapy sessions, support groups, and community forums offered spaces for reflection, discussion, and emotional processing, acknowledging that the resolution of a case in court was only part of the journey toward healing. The human element, grief, resilience, fear, and courage, remained central, a reminder that justice was intertwined with the ongoing process of emotional and psychological reconciliation. In neighborhoods surrounding Maplewood Drive, life began to recalibrate. Streets once marked by suspicion and quiet anxiety returned to routines, but the memory of what had occurred lingered in subtle ways. The careful watching from windows, the recollection of shadows in the night, and the stories passed down to younger generations as cautionary tales. The resolution of the case did not erase the past, but reframed it, transforming uncertainty into understanding, fear into acknowledgement, and silence into a narrative of accountability. Through it all, the investigation's architects, the detectives, forensic specialists, and legal teams, receive recognition for their unwavering commitment. Awards, public commendations, and personal accolades celebrated the meticulous work that bridged the decades, ensuring that justice, delayed but unwavering, prevailed. Yet for them, the greater reward was intangible. The restoration of community trust, the affirmation of investigative rigor, and the knowledge that truth, no matter how deeply buried, could never be entirely extinguished. As the sun set on Maplewood Drive, shadows lengthening over quiet homes, a sense of closure settled over the neighborhood. The decades of uncertainty, speculation, and fear had given way to a hard-won certainty, a narrative finally grounded in evidence and accountability. The Harrison cold case, once a symbol of unanswered questions and lingering dread, had been transformed into a testament to human persistence, scientific advancement, and the enduring quest for justice that transcends time. The story did not end with the verdict. Its echoes reverberated through law enforcement agencies, communities, and families affected by similar unresolved crimes. It served as a reminder that every piece of evidence, every preserved memory, and every relentless pursuit of truth had the potential to illuminate the darkest corners of human experience, proving that even after decades, justice could still prevail. Even after the gavel had fallen and the courtroom emptied, the echoes of the Michigan 1984 cold case reverberated through the halls of justice, lingering in the minds of those who had waited decades for answers. In the months following the verdict, investigators returned to the files one last time, reviewing the painstakingly collected evidence, the detailed notes of interviews, and the archival photographs that had once seemed like relics of a bygone era. Every fiber, every fingerprint, every shadow captured on film was revisited with a reverence born from the recognition that justice had been hard-won, but fragile, reliant on the precision of human diligence and the march of scientific progress. The Harrison family found themselves navigating an entirely new reality. Relief intertwined with grief as they grappled with the knowledge that the person responsible had been unmasked, yet the years of fear and uncertainty could never truly be reclaimed. Their days, once punctuated by anxiety and the silent dread of unanswered questions, slowly transformed into a rhythm of reflection, remembrance, and cautious hope. Each family member carried the weight of the past differently. Some found solace in speaking openly about the long nights of worry, while others quietly processed the trauma in the solitude of memory, allowing grief and closure to coexist in a delicate balance. Meanwhile, the community remained captivated by the narrative, drawn to the tension between past and present, uncertainty and revelation. Neighborhood forums buzzed with recollections, re-examined in light of the verdict, and local media continued to dissect every angle of the investigation. Children who had grown up hearing whispers of a terrible event now faced the reality of the story's resolution, learning not only about the crime itself, but also about the extraordinary efforts that had gone into solving it. Schools held discussions about civic responsibility and the role of law enforcement, using the case as a teaching tool to highlight the intersection of patience, science, and moral obligation. Detectives reflected privately on the years spent chasing elusive leads, each failed tip and overlooked detail forming the foundation of a narrative that ultimately reached its climax through persistence and innovation. Cold case units across the state analyzed their own archives, inspired by the Michigan 1984 resolution, seeking to identify cases where forgotten evidence or untested forensic material might finally tip the balance in favor of justice. The success was celebrated not merely as a triumph over one crime, but as proof of concept for the broader mission of law enforcement, that no case is ever truly closed until every avenue has been pursued and every piece of evidence thoroughly examined. In public discourse, the Harrison case prompted a renewed dialogue about the societal costs of unsolved crimes. Experts discussed the psychological toll on families, the erosion of trust within communities, and a lingering fear that shadows neighborhoods long after the immediate danger has passed. The resolution of the cold case was heralded as both a victory and a cautionary tale, a reminder that vigilance, empathy, and the continual evolution of investigative methods are necessary to protect the vulnerable and restore faith in the justice system. For the suspect, the consequences of decades-long evasion finally manifested in tangible terms. Prison walls replaced the facade of normalcy, and daily routines, once taken for granted, were stripped away, replaced by the regimented constraints of incarceration. Psychological evaluations noted the shock of confrontation with evidence long ignored, and the stark reality that the passage of time had eroded opportunities for denial or escape. The narrative of guilt, once abstract and contested, now existed in incontrovertible detail, documented in court records, forensic reports, and the collective memory of a community that had endured uncertainty for far too long. At the same time, the case inspired countless individuals to revisit old wounds in their own lives. Families whose loved ones had disappeared, victims whose voices had been muffled by time, and communities that had accepted fear as a permanent fixture suddenly saw possibilities for resolution. Cold case units reported a surge in tips, renewed interest from the public, and a hopeful realization that decades of silence could be broken with persistence and careful scrutiny. The ripple effect of one solved case extended far beyond its immediate borders, influencing both law enforcement priorities and the public perception of justice's reach. As the anniversary of the crime approached, memorials and quiet vigils took on new meaning. The community honored not only the memory of the victim, but also the tireless efforts of those who had refused to let the case fade into obscurity. Stories were shared in newspapers and online forums, highlighting the technological breakthroughs, the dogged detective work, and the emotional resilience required to achieve closure. The narrative became an emblem of hope, a tangible demonstration that even when time seems insurmountable, the careful pursuit of truth can prevail. In the months that followed, a subtle transformation took hold within the city. Streets once viewed with suspicion, regained a tentative sense of normalcy. Neighbors reconnected, discussing the past openly and acknowledging the ways in which fear had shaped communal behavior. Local law enforcement established educational programs, sharing insights from the case with aspiring investigators, students, and the public, emphasizing the principles of meticulous observation, patience, and respect for the weight of historical evidence. The lessons of the Harrison case became part of the collective consciousness, teaching that even cold cases shrouded in mystery for decades are not beyond resolution. Behind the headlines, the human stories continued to unfold. The Harrison family engaged in therapy, community outreach, and public advocacy, channeling their experiences into initiatives aimed at supporting other families affected by violent crime. The psychological impact of long-term uncertainty was acknowledged, treated with sensitivity, and transformed into action, turning private trauma into public awareness. By confronting the past, sharing their narrative, and embracing the lessons of resilience and justice, they contributed to a broader understanding of the emotional and societal stakes inherent in unresolved crimes. Detectives remained vigilant, maintaining a legacy of dedication that extended beyond the Michigan 1984 case. They documented every procedural innovation, every breakthrough, and every lesson learned, ensuring that future investigations could benefit from hard-won insights. Collaborative efforts with forensic scientists, legal experts, and technological specialists emphasize the interdisciplinary nature of modern crime solving, demonstrating that the successful resolution of cold cases depends on a delicate balance of human intuition, scientific rigor, and relentless determination. And so, as seasons changed and years moved forward, the shadow of the past gradually receded. The Michigan 1984 cold case, once a source of fear and speculation, became a story of persistence, innovation, and human resilience. Justice, delayed but definitive, served not only the immediate victims, but also the community, law enforcement, and society at large, affirming the enduring principle that truth, no matter how deeply buried, will ultimately come to light. Closure, though complex and layered, offered a sense of resolution. The memories of that dark night were preserved, not as a source of ongoing fear, but as a testament to the power of sustained effort, the evolution of forensic science, and the unyielding human commitment to justice. The Harrison family, the investigators, and the community could finally begin to navigate life with the knowledge that even after decades, the scales of justice had balanced, and the truth had prevailed, echoing the timeless promise that cold cases, no matter how old, can be solved with patience, ingenuity, and unwavering dedication. The ripples of the Michigan 1984 cold case extended far beyond the courtroom walls, infiltrating every corner of the community, every conversation, every memory etched into the city's consciousness. Even years after the arrest, the streets seemed to whisper fragments of that night, fragments of fear and speculation that had once gripped neighbors, lingering in empty alleys, in the dim glow of streetlights, in the nervous chatter of people recalling a time when the unthinkable had occurred. It was as if the city itself carried the echoes, the tension of decades, a collective breath held for years now slowly released, but never fully forgotten. Families who had lived in the shadow of the case spoke in hushed tones about the relief, the disbelief, the lingering chill of understanding that someone they had passed on the street shared a conversation with, or waved hello to had been harboring dark truths. In coffee shops, at corner stores, and front yards, the narrative of the cold case was dissected, debated, and revisited, each retelling a ritual of processing trauma, fear, and finally, closure. For some, the shock of the revelation was accompanied by an unsettling recognition. Evil had lived quietly among them, patiently, waiting to be uncovered by meticulous detective work. Detectives, both those who had originally worked the case and the newer generation brought in by the breakthroughs of modern forensics, reflected on the confluence of luck, technology, and human determination that had finally brought the case to resolution. They pored over evidence that had once seemed insignificant, a latent fingerprint on a doorframe, an overlooked fiber, a witness statement buried in a dusty file. Each tiny detail, initially dismissed, became a critical piece of the puzzle. The lesson was clear, and it was repeated in precincts across the state. Nothing is too small, nothing is too old, nothing is beyond the reach of persistence. Community meetings, once tense with fear and suspicion, evolved into sessions of dialogue and reflection. Victims' advocates spoke openly about the long-term psychological toll of unsolved crimes, detailing the unique torment of living with uncertainty, the gnawing question of why that never ceases, and the weight of knowing the perpetrator remained free for years. Their stories resonated with those who had felt the same: neighbors, friends, relatives, creating a collective understanding that while the crime had been resolved, the trauma endured, nuanced, layered, and woven into the fabric of everyday life. The Harrison family, in particular, became a symbol of endurance. Their willingness to speak publicly, to allow their grief and their relief to be shared with the world, inspired other families who had been silenced by fear or frustration. They participated in outreach programs, engaged with support networks, and lent their voices to initiatives that emphasized the importance of never abandoning a case, regardless of its age. Their narrative served as both cautionary tale and beacon of hope, that even when answers seem unattainable, resolution remains possible through persistence, vigilance, and the unrelenting pursuit of truth. In classrooms, the cold case became a case study, a tool for teaching investigative techniques, forensic analysis, and the psychology of crime. Students learned how a single overlooked piece of evidence could have delayed justice for decades, and how the evolution of DNA technology and forensic science could bridge the gap between uncertainty and accountability. Professors emphasized the moral and ethical responsibilities inherent in investigation, encouraging young minds to understand that crime solving is not merely about statistics or procedures, but about lives, communities, and the profound human need for justice. The suspect's world, in contrast, had contracted into the claustrophobic confines of incarceration. Days once filled with freedom and anonymity were replaced by regimented schedules, scrutinized interactions, and the ever-present reality of judgment. The psychological burden of recognition, of being confronted with irrefutable evidence, and the slow, deliberate unraveling of decades-long evasion became a central theme of evaluations conducted by forensic psychologists. It was a stark reminder of the inevitability of accountability. Time may shield the guilty for a period, but truth, like a patient hunter, eventually closes in. Law enforcement agencies used the case as a blueprint for reinvigorating cold case investigation statewide. Training programs highlighted the importance of revisiting old files, reanalyzing physical evidence with new technology, and approaching witnesses whose memories, while faded, could still provide clarity. Multidisciplinary teams were assembled, combining the talents of criminologists, forensic scientists, and veteran detectives to tackle cases once thought unsolvable. The Michigan 1984 resolution became a rallying cry. No file should gather dust, no lead should be ignored, and no crime should be left unanswered. Public fascination with the case endured, drawing journalists, writers, and media personalities to the story, each retelling framed with suspense, tension, and an eye for the dramatic arc that had unfolded over decades. Headlines celebrated the breakthrough. Interviews explored the human dimensions, and podcasts dissected minute details for audiences eager to understand the mechanics of cold case resolution. The story was told and retold, becoming a part of the cultural memory of Michigan, a narrative that balanced horror with hope, crime with justice, and despair with the satisfaction of closure. Amid all this, a quieter transformation occurred. Streets that had once been shadowed with suspicion now carried a tentative sense of safety. Neighbors who had avoided late-night walks now strolled confidently, acknowledging one another, sharing stories not just of fear, but of triumph. The community, scarred yet resilient, began to reclaim spaces that had been mentally cordoned off by decades of uncertainty. Parks, alleyways, and local landmarks, once imbued with tension, now held memories of perseverance, investigation, and, ultimately, justice. The Harrison family continued their journey, blending private mourning with public engagement. They became mentors to families navigating the slow, often frustrating process of investigation, emphasizing the importance of persistence, patience, and the courage to speak truth to authority. Their story inspired policy reviews, improved victim support systems, and heightened awareness within law enforcement about the delicate balance between procedural diligence and human empathy. For detectives and forensic teams, the Michigan 1984 cold case became a testament to the necessity of patience. The realization that decades could pass before evidence revealed its secrets reinforced a philosophy of meticulousness, thoroughness, and a respect for the incremental nature of investigation. Every fingerprint, every fiber, every archived statement was treated not merely as material evidence, but as a thread in the intricate tapestry of truth. As the anniversary of the resolution approached, the city collectively acknowledged the endurance required to achieve justice. Memorials and community gatherings honored the victim, celebrated the investigative triumph, and underscored the communal nature of closure. The Michigan 1984 cold case, once a source of terror and unanswered questions, had transformed into a story of persistence, hope, and the reaffirmation of justice, leaving behind a legacy that would influence investigative practices, community engagement, and the cultural memory of the region for generations to come. Even years after the arrest in the Michigan 1984 cold case, the tension that had gripped the city lingered in the quiet corners, in the shadows of the streets, in the echo of every late-night footstep. Residents whispered about the night that changed everything, the discovery that turned speculation into reality. The details were stark, unflinching, the kind of truth that cut through years of denial and fear. Families who had long lived with uncertainty now faced the challenge of integrating closure into lives shaped by suspicion and caution. The neighborhood, once tense and wary, gradually began to exhale, the invisible weight of unanswered questions slowly lifting, leaving behind scars that reminded everyone of the fragility of safety and trust. Law enforcement continued to navigate the ripple effects. The breakthrough had reinvigorated old protocols, sparking new initiatives to revisit unsolved crimes, to comb through dusty files, to examine forgotten evidence with modern forensic technology. Investigators pored over fingerprints, fibers, witness accounts, and long-ignored details, aware that a single missed clue could alter lives for decades. The case became a blueprint for cold case resolution, a demonstration of the convergence of meticulous detective work, community cooperation, and technological advancement. The moral was clear: no file, no lead, no memory should be dismissed as trivial or lost to time. The Harrison family, once victims of circumstance, now found themselves in a reluctant spotlight. Interviews, podcasts, and media coverage thrust their grief and resilience in a public view. They spoke candidly about the torment of uncertainty, the slow-burning anxiety that comes from living alongside an unresolved crime, and a mix of relief and shock that accompanied the arrest. Their voices carried the weight of experience, offering insight into the human cost of delay, the emotional strain of unanswered questions, and the ultimate catharsis that came from seeing justice served. They became advocates, mentors, and symbols, connecting with other families who had lived through similar pain and inspiring law enforcement to remember the human faces behind the cases. Community gatherings began to shift in tone. Once somber and guarded, they became platforms for remembrance, reflection, and cautious optimism. Neighbors who had avoided each other in fear of the unknown now shared stories of endurance, of survival, of witnessing the power of tenacity. Local schools used the case as a teaching moment, illustrating the importance of observation, analysis, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Students debated the ethical responsibilities of investigators, learned about the evolution of forensic science, and understood that justice often requires patience, resilience, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. Psychologists and counselors noted the long-term effects of living with unresolved crime. Anxiety, distrust, and hypervigilance were common among those who had lived near the scene, watched the news, or had personal connections to the victim. Therapy sessions, support groups, and community programs addressed these lingering shadows, acknowledging that even with an arrest, the emotional landscape of a neighborhood remains complex. Healing, while facilitated by closure, was a process that required recognition of trauma, reinforcement of safety, and the slow rebuilding of trust. For law enforcement, the case underscored the evolution of investigative techniques. Fingerprints once deemed unhelpful now revealed critical links. DNA analysis provided breakthroughs where traditional methods had stalled. Detective teams analyzed cold files with fresh eyes, cross-referencing witness statements, scrutinizing old photographs, and applying new technologies to old evidence. The case illustrated that time does not negate responsibility, and that perseverance combined with innovation can overcome even decades-long mysteries. Media coverage remained intense. Journalists dissected the case with an eye for detail, highlighting the procedural triumphs, the moments of tension, and the human stories intertwined with the crime. Podcasts, documentaries, and feature articles explored each facet, balancing suspense with reflection, showing audiences the depth of effort required to resolve a case that had seemed unsolvable. The narrative was not just about crime, but about human endurance, community vigilance, and the relentless pursuit of truth across generations. Neighborhoods once defined by fear slowly reclaimed their streets. Parents walked children to school without apprehension. Residents engaged in conversations that had previously been subdued, and local businesses reopened without the shadow of suspicion. The city, scarred but resilient, adjusted to the reality that evil had walked among them, and that vigilance, communication, and solidarity were essential for collective safety. The case's resolution was a testament to the power of persistence, a reminder that truth, no matter how delayed, ultimately emerges. The Harrison family continued to navigate the intersection of private grief and public attention. Their advocacy inspired new policies for victim support, improved communication channels between law enforcement and communities, and heightened awareness of the importance of revisiting unsolved crimes. Their story became a teaching tool, not only for investigators, but also for civic leaders and social workers, emphasizing that justice is both procedural and profoundly human. Detectives who had participated in the case spoke of the psychological toll of prolonged uncertainty. The weight of unresolved files, the pressure of unsolved murders, and the knowledge that a single oversight could delay justice for decades created an atmosphere of high stakes and meticulous caution. The case reinforced the importance of methodical investigation, attention to detail, and the moral responsibility to victims and their communities. As the anniversary of the arrest approached, public memorials and discussions honored both the victim and the investigative achievement. The Michigan 1984 cold case had transformed from a source of fear to a symbol of persistence, vigilance, and hope. The narrative of crime, community, and eventual justice became woven into the cultural memory of the city, a story that would educate, caution, and inspire for generations, reminding all who heard it that truth, though sometimes delayed, cannot be denied. The night air in Michigan carried a silence that felt heavier than usual, a reminder of the years lost, the unanswered questions, and the dark shadow that had hovered over the city since 1984. Every streetlight seemed to cast elongated shapes on the pavement, ghostly silhouettes echoing the memories of that fateful night. Detectives returned to the scene, retracing steps with an almost ritualistic precision, aware that each inch of pavement, each doorframe, each forgotten alley might hold a clue overlooked decades ago. The cold case, long dormant, had reawakened a tension that refused to dissipate. Witnesses, some aged, some long moved away, were called back, their recollections like shards of glass, sharp, fragmented, yet essential. Every testimony, every minor observation, became a thread in the tapestry of the investigation, weaving together a narrative that had eluded law enforcement for years. In the Harrison household, the memories remained vivid, impossible to suppress. Each family member wrestled with the duality of relief and lingering fear. The arrest of the suspect had provided validation, a legal closure, yet it could not erase the nights of anxiety, the fear of walking alone, the cautious glances at strangers that had shaped their lives. Therapy sessions chronicled the complex emotions that came with reopening old wounds: anger, sorrow, guilt, and a profound sense of exhaustion. The family learned to articulate their trauma, to recognize that closure was a process rather than a single event. The community, too, felt the shift. Neighbors who had been guarded now tentatively engaged with one another, rebuilding the trust fractured by fear. Detectives involved in the case described the breakthrough as the culmination of tireless dedication and evolving technology. Fingerprints that had been collected in 1984, once considered dead ends, were re-examined using digital enhancement techniques. DNA evidence, preserved meticulously over the decades, finally yielded a match. The arrest was executed in the dead of night, a calculated move designed to prevent the suspect from fleeing or causing harm. The operation itself was swift, efficient, yet carried a weight of symbolic justice. A decades-old shadow finally confronted and neutralized. Every officer involved understood the significance, a long-awaited resolution, a triumph of perseverance over the limitations of time. Public reaction was immediate and intense. News outlets highlighted the case on front pages. Online platforms buzzed with discussion, and local communities were drawn into debates over the pace of justice and the power of forensic science. Citizens expressed shock, relief, and a rekindled faith in law enforcement. Yet, beneath the surface, there was also unease, a reminder that evil can hide, sometimes for decades, and that vigilance is never optional. Editorials pondered the societal implications of cold cases, emphasizing the moral and ethical responsibility to pursue justice relentlessly, regardless of how much time had passed. The legal proceedings that followed were complex, as expected in a case of such duration. Evidence was meticulously presented, witness statements revisited, and forensic findings scrutinized under the harsh light of the courtroom. The defense, predictably, challenged the reliability of aged evidence, questioned the recollections of long-distant witnesses, and attempted to exploit gaps created by time. Prosecutors countered with a narrative of persistence, technological advancement, and the unwavering pursuit of truth. Each motion, each objection, each deliberation underscored the profound complexity inherent in cold cases, where years of delay can complicate memory, procedure, and public perception. Community outreach programs emerged as a direct consequence of the case's resolution. Neighborhood watch initiatives, educational forums, and public seminars on crime prevention became more prominent, inspired by the realization that vigilance, communication, and preparedness could prevent future tragedies. The Michigan 1984 cold case became a teaching tool, illustrating not only the dangers that lurk unseen, but also the power of collective action, forensic innovation, and steadfast dedication in confronting and resolving crimes long thought unsolvable. Victims' advocacy groups seized the moment to highlight the importance of support networks. The emotional toll of unresolved crimes, often underestimated by the public, received attention through workshops, counseling sessions, and media campaigns. Families affected by other cold cases were offered guidance, strategies for coping with prolonged uncertainty, and reassurance that persistent effort could eventually lead to answers. The Harrison family, now publicly recognized for their endurance, participated in these initiatives, sharing their story as both cautionary tale and source of inspiration. As the trial progressed, the city experienced a palpable tension, an intertwining of past trauma and present anticipation. Streets once avoided after dark saw cautious pedestrians returning. Businesses reopened with renewed energy, schools incorporated lessons on civic responsibility and investigative diligence, and local authorities implemented measures to prevent future lapses. The impact of a single cold case extended far beyond the courtroom, reshaping public consciousness and embedding itself into the cultural memory of the city. Yet, even as justice moved forward, subtle anxieties lingered. The realization that a crime could remain hidden for decades unsettled many. Citizens questioned the adequacy of past investigations, the reliability of memory, and the role of technological innovation in law enforcement. These reflections, while uncomfortable, sparked broader conversations about public safety, the evolution of investigative procedures, and the ethical obligations of those tasked with protecting the community. The Harrison family continued to grapple with their evolving reality. Relief and closure were tempered by the haunting memories of loss and fear. Interviews, media appearances, and public speaking engagements reminded them that their story resonated far beyond personal grief. They became advocates for victims' rights, pioneers in raising awareness about the importance of revisiting cold cases, and voices for the silent struggle endured by families awaiting resolution. Through it all, the Michigan 1984 cold case stood as a stark reminder. Time does not erase crime. Memory does not diminish responsibility. And truth, though delayed, eventually emerges. The arrest, trial, and community response created a legacy of vigilance, education, and hope, a narrative demonstrating that persistent effort, combined with technological innovation and human dedication, can overcome decades of uncertainty, fear, and unanswered questions. The city moved forward, yet the echoes of that night in 1984 remained etched in collective memory. Streetlights, empty alleys, and quiet neighborhoods served as reminders that vigilance is a necessity, that justice, no matter how delayed, carries enduring significance, and that every cold case resolved reaffirms the enduring power of persistence, courage, and unwavering pursuit of truth. The courtroom was tense, a convergence of decades of anticipation, fear, and unresolved anguish. Every seat was filled. Reporters pressed their notebooks, cameras angled for the perfect shot, and the Harrison family sat together, a mixture of relief and anxiety etched across their faces. The prosecutor's opening statement was precise, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. He laid out the sequence of events from 1984, highlighting the overlooked evidence, the missed leads, and the painstaking work that had finally unraveled the mystery. He emphasized the significance of the DNA match, the fingerprints rediscovered in an old evidence locker, and the unwavering efforts of the detectives who refused to let the case die. Every word resonated with the weight of decades, each fact amplified by the knowledge that the community had waited 36 years for justice. The defense, predictably, attempted to fracture the narrative, questioning the reliability of evidence preserved for decades. They scrutinized witnesses' memories, emphasizing the natural erosion of recall over time, and suggested that the scientific methods used, while advanced, might be insufficient to guarantee certainty. Yet, the prosecution countered with a detailed explanation of forensic protocols, preservation standards, and the rigorous cross-examinations that had verified every sample, every fingerprint, every trace of DNA. The courtroom was a battleground, a clash between the inertia of decades and the precision of modern investigation. Every motion filed, every objection raised, underscored the complexity of trying a case that had been frozen in time, a crime now reanimated by evidence and persistence. Outside the courthouse, the city was alive with speculation. News vans lined the streets, reporters broadcasting live updates, and citizens gathered in small groups, discussing every development with a mixture of fascination and relief. The community, once paralyzed by fear, now felt the creeping presence of resolution, yet anxiety lingered. What had gone unnoticed for so long could happen again. Editorials debated the effectiveness of cold case units, the ethics of revisiting old evidence, and the responsibility of law enforcement to ensure no case was forgotten. Conversations in cafes, on porches, and in local schools reflected the collective awakening of a city confronting the reality of long unsolved crimes. Back in the Harrison home, memories of 1984 persisted, vivid and unyielding. The scent of the house, the creak of floorboards, the shadowed corners, all became symbols of that night, reminders that even resolution does not erase trauma. Family members spoke of sleepless nights, the silent fear that had dictated every decision, and the cautious wariness that had defined their interactions with strangers. Therapy sessions explored these emotions, allowing the family to process decades of anxiety while learning to reconcile relief with lingering fear. The arrest provided legal closure but could not fully cleanse the psyche of long-buried trauma. The investigation's reopening had inspired other cold cases to be reevaluated. Detectives across Michigan, motivated by the success of the Harrison case, revisited evidence long considered dormant. Advances in forensic science, especially in DNA analysis and digital fingerprint comparison, became tools of renewed scrutiny. Cold case files, once gathering dust, were examined with fresh eyes, each minor lead recontextualized, each witness re-interviewed. The ripple effect of the Harrison case was tangible, sending a message that persistence and modern technology could finally overcome decades of uncertainty. Community organizations seized the moment to emphasize safety and awareness. Neighborhood watch programs expanded. Educational seminars highlighted the importance of reporting suspicious activity, and local schools incorporated lessons on civic responsibility and the mechanisms of justice. The city's collective consciousness had shifted. Citizens were no longer passive observers, but active participants in safeguarding their community. The cold case became both a cautionary tale and a symbol of hope, illustrating that vigilance, persistence, and technological innovation could eventually bring resolution. In the courtroom, witness testimonies brought the past alive. Eyewitness accounts, though aged, were cross-examined meticulously. Their memories, once fragmented, were corroborated by forensic evidence, creating a cohesive narrative that withstood scrutiny. Each recollection, each small detail, painted a picture of that night in 1984. Every shadow, every creak, every distant sound contributing to the mosaic of truth. The defense's attempts to undermine the reliability of memory were countered by a carefully constructed framework of corroboration, demonstrating that even decades later, the facts could be reconstructed with precision. The emotional climax of the trial arrived when the jury deliberated. Hours stretched into tension-filled minutes as the panel weighed decades of evidence, conflicting testimonies, and the moral imperative of justice delayed. Outside, the community held its collective breath. Families who had endured their own unresolved cases watched with a mix of hope and apprehension, understanding that the outcome of one cold case could influence the treatment and prioritization of many others. The city itself seemed suspended, a collective pulse waiting for affirmation that truth, no matter how delayed, would ultimately prevail. Finally, the verdict was delivered. A mixture of relief, catharsis, and lingering unease washed over the courtroom and the city. Justice, long postponed, had been served. Yet, the arrest and conviction could not erase the emotional residue. The years of fear, the nights spent haunted by uncertainty, the community's gradual erosion of trust. The Harrison family, though vindicated, continued to navigate a complex landscape of emotions, balancing gratitude with the residual shadows of trauma. As law enforcement closed the case file, the lessons endured. The Michigan 1984 cold case had become a benchmark, a demonstration that time alone does not diminish the obligation to seek justice. Advances in forensic technology, combined with relentless investigative work, had illuminated truths hidden for decades. Communities, witnesses, and families learned that persistence, vigilance, and courage could ultimately bridge the gap between unresolved fear and closure. The case was over, yet its echoes would reverberate through Michigan for generations, a reminder that justice, no matter how delayed, carries the enduring weight of moral and civic responsibility.